Welcome to Care Vision's Family Talks, where we look beyond the labels to real strategies that protect and support children. I'm your host, Lucy Johnston, and today we're absolutely honoured to be joined by Baroness Anne Longfield, former Children's Commissioner and Chair of the Commission on Young Lives. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us.
Oh, real pleasure. Thank you.
So today we're going to explore two critical themes: county lines exploitation and school exclusions, how they intersect and what families can do. So firstly, Anne, can you just explain what county lines gangs are to those who may not know that much and how they typically operate?
Yeah, I mean, this is a phrase that sadly we've become quite used to over recent years, but even going back a decade, few people would have known what these are. Essentially, they're organized crime, which is around organized crime groups who use and target vulnerable young people to help deliver their business model, which is usually around delivering and making money out of drugs, typically. It's vicious, it's very violent, it targets the most vulnerable young people. And once they're in, they really struggle to get out. They're scared stiff most of the time. And gangs will operate in areas where there's a demand for drugs. And sadly, that's, an awful lot of areas, typically the county lines. And the term comes from the phone line, if you like, originally. But they will send people into areas. They will have local groups, often of young people, delivering. They used to send kids out on trains, but more got noticed, so fewer and fewer of those now. More is delivered or ordered on the internet. Typically, they will work really hard to recruit kids into the business. And I use the terminology around business because that's how they describe it. They're exporting their drugs. There's import areas. They will manage their business very much with an eye on their ever increasing profits. But they will be targeting kids to be part of this all the time. And often it can be quite kind of unsubtly subtle, if you know what I mean. So the whole thing is to get children to be beholden to them. Sometimes they might be in a chip shop, buy an extra bag of chips, give it to the kid who's looking miserable and lonely by themselves and say, oh, do you want this? And then, of course, the next thing, well, you owe me because I gave you chips. Once kids, showered with goodwill, showered with attention. Often those children won't get it in the first place. But so they'll be, completely overwhelmed by this. They'll be given a job to deliver some drugs. Actually, what often happens then is they're kind of systematically robbed. They will then be told that they then owe them. There's a debt bond established, and the debt bond is which drives the link and which increases over time, and which means they're compliant often to those that are, managing the gang.
And how widespread is this kind of exploitation across the UK? And have you seen an increase, do you think? Is it hard to measure that?
Well, it is hard to measure because, of course, an awful lot of this goes under the radar. But I think, over the last 7-8 years, there's been an established number that have increased. The different times, the National Crime Agency have estimated quite how many of these are in existence. Some are taken away, some reform, and every police force in the country will now have county lines operating in their area. We know the number of young people who are referred to local authorities with concerns around being exploited or part of a gang are significant, but still very low compared to the number that we think are been involved in this kind of activity. And as
What is
for
that number? Do you think it's in the hundreds, the thousands?
well, the number here, I've got here the number that were referred of child criminal exploitation, a case that were identified in children in need of assessments. They have gone up by 50%. Over the last 2 years, but they've gone up from 10,140 to in 22 to 15,700. Now, all the work that I've done over the last decade would say that it's many times more than that. This is literally the tip of the iceberg. And for every young person that's involved in a gang in any way, there's another 5 who aren't known to the authorities. And again, typically it will be the kids who have the most vulnerabilities, special educational needs, falling out of school. And it's often when they're not in school that actually their protections, if you like, from having people around them, from being in one place and being supervised all day, fall away. And of course, prime candidates then for those who wish to exploit them.
Is there any other things that distinguish the types of children who are likely to be targeted or likely to be vulnerable to the gangs, other than special educational needs or school exclusions? Are there other vulnerabilities such as trauma, childhood trauma, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, the vulnerability will be something that, those that are seeking to exploit children will be really honed into. They will watch children who are walking home from school by themselves looking miserable. They might sit in a cafe and do that, a few days on the trot, and then they might approach them. And I can, from my point of view, so much of this can be prevented. And what I love is that, there were people looking out for those children to, provide the kind of positive support to that same degree. They will often target children and young people in care, for obvious reasons that, they might be not have adults around them to the same extent. We know that young people in care who are in the kind of semi-supported accommodation, which would be children 16, 17, 18, are often highly targeted. They'll target those around, they'll know where the accommodation is and target them there. But also kids who, maybe around town centres, around kind of chicken shops, fast food outlets, all those kind of things. Anyone who looks like they might be by themselves, who looks like they're having a bit of a miserable time. And these are the kids often who crave being part of something, crave that sense of belonging, often bullied themselves and suddenly might have people who they think can defend them and protect them themselves. But of course, it doesn't take long to know that it isn't going to be any form of protection. Actually, it's going to be a huge threat of violence as well.
Yes, and we can talk about that in a bit. But so do you think there are particular risks for children in foster care, given what you've just said?
I think it's often children who are in residential care. And this kind of semi-supported care, the kind where they don't have 24-hour supervision and care, they might just have support teams. And we know some of those places are, much less formal. We know that some are shared with adults, vulnerable adults as well. And of course, when you get all those factors coming together, someone who's had, a lot of trauma in their life and is vulnerable anyway, someone who's living without that kind of framework of care and supervision, and then with other adults around as well. Well, actually, those all combine to make quite a perilous situation for those young people.
And you mentioned before there's a link between school exclusions, you mentioned in this podcast, and being vulnerable to exploitation. Can you talk to us a little bit about school exclusions and the ghost children that you've done so much work about, which is children that are absent persistently or intermittently absent from school?
Yeah.
What's the link there? Is that?
Well, I mean, at its heart, the link is that if you're in school, you've got the school kind of offers that framework of protection. You've got a structure to your day. You've got teachers who will know you're there. There will be, they will know if things aren't going right, they can intervene. You've got your peers there, so you're in hopefully a positive peer group as well. You may have people who can help and support you in terms of, potentially help you if you're struggling in school, potentially if you've got problems with mental health. All of those things come as part of going to school. If you're not in school, which might be because you're not getting the support you need in school, and your parents have taken you out of the school to start teaching you at home, but maybe you aren't getting that kind of education all the time. If you're suspended or excluded from school, that's time when you're not within that positive framework, if you like. If you're sent to a pupil referral unit or alternative provision, where you might be sent that specialise in those that are struggling and have more problems in school, often you're put onto a kind of, basically a much shorter time, a much reduced timetable. So you might only be in school for a limited number of hours a week. And all these things mean that when you're not in school, you are just much more exposed. You're likely to be spending more time in the community by yourself. You aren't going to have adults around you to step in and protect or provide that kind of support. And for those that want to find kids who look like they can be brought into the fold for criminal purposes, it's a complete straight line to them. And of course, it's much to the benefit of those that are trying to seek and exploit young people if they can isolate them from their families, their peers, their teachers, because they've got then more opportunities to just get to them and keep them compliant as well.
And you've done a lot of work around that, around school absenteeism of different sorts. What are the numbers like now, and how have they risen in recent years, and why?
So the numbers of children who have been absent from school following the COVID pandemic have skyrocketed. And we now, there's been slight reductions, but there's now still almost a fifth of children and young people, who are persistently absent from school. And persistently absent is taken as being absent 1 day in 10. So every fortnight, there's 1 day a child isn't in school, which might not seem that often, but imagine a tenth of your education being lost. Imagine 1 day a fortnight you just not getting there and missing out on not only education, but everything else that's going on. And we also know that the number of children who are severely absent from school, and that accounts, I think, for about 170,000 now children. Those are children who are out of school more than they're in. So 50% plus of the time they're not in school. So those are huge numbers. And there's all sorts of reasons that are thought to be part of this. For some children, it may be poor health, and certainly at the beginning, following the COVID pandemic, that was more likely to be the case. But for a lot of children, mental health plays a big part in this, levels of anxiety and lack of confidence to be able to be in school. Children with special educational needs often were very impacted by the COVID pandemic and were slower to return or needed more support. And a lot of the support that traditionally in the past, or 10 years plus in the past, might have been around the school to help children socialize and help them have a good time, if you like, when they're not in school, has really fallen away over that period of time as budgets have been cut. And of course, when you don't intervene early, it's a short-term solution, because it means that problems escalate, and you end up with much more costly, for both the children and indeed for the public purse, solutions being needed. And roughly, we spend almost a half the amount we spend on early intervention prevention has fallen about half over the last 15 years, but the amount we spent on crisis has increased by about 50% over that time. It's a straight correlation. Of course, if you spend on crisis, you haven't got much left to spend on prevention. It's just a loop there. But those young people not being in school, there's a huge push from government to get them back into school. That means you have to work with families to support them to be able to get them into school. Many more youth workers in some schools that are helping build that sense of belonging and really offer that bridge into school. But it's something that, I believe really needs to be a huge focus, because if we lose those children from their education, but also from the community of the school, even for one day, a fortnight, then that is going to show in terms of the qualifications and their attainment educationally, but also their social skills, everything they will need to lead positive and productive lives as adults. And as a country, we want to grow the confidence of the nation, we want to grow our economy and our confidence as a country, and we can't do that if we aren't really supporting our young people to thrive to the extent they could. Interestingly, I spoke at a conference, not this last summer, the summer before, in Canada, which was actually a global meeting of countries who were all experiencing this kind of ghost children, non-return to school. And across the US, across quite a lot of European countries, but also countries in Africa and much further afield, there was a similar trend. That experience of lockdown had meant that those children who didn't much get on with school stopped going. Those children in countries that needed their kids to be able to work essentially and be part of the household income had increased in some countries. And then in all countries, young people's mental health had plummeted because, at least in part, of that lockdown and isolation, and there was then much more reticence to go back into school. So it's a complicated set of scenarios, but it's always, as ever is the case, the most vulnerable kids have the biggest mountain to climb as they, grow up, who were most affected by that impact and who are most seen now not in school on a regular enough basis.
So presumably some of those, we don't know what's happened. There's been research done, but some of them have dropped off the roll and we don't know where they are. I mean, we're talking about county lines gangs. Maybe some of them have got involved in that.
Well, certainly for those children who, were struggling and not thriving in school, if you like, before the pandemic, especially older young people, then, having time out of school, it's very likely they didn't return. And if they didn't return, what does that mean? As you say, in terms of their involvement in exploitation, in terms of county lines. Now, what we do know is that county lines, following the pandemic, the age group of children involved has also dropped. And so there's two things that have happened. One is that the age of children who are involved in county lines, and you can see it in the headlines when there is sometimes, tragedies and the like. Now it's not uncommon to see 14-year-olds, even 13-year-olds, who are involved in that way. And I visited and talked to social workers and the police in one area in northwest of England, which was when we were just producing our report from the Commission on Young Lives. And they said there was a group of 13 and 14-year-olds who were actually running the county line across the country, 100 miles away, who, were giving out all sorts of kind of violence and punishment and intimidation in their area. And, this is obviously a young age. They said that they would take the scooters from the people who were delivering pizzas on the estate, and they would use it. They would drive cars and use sat navs to get there. But, such a dangerous activity, obviously at any period of a person's life, but for being so young, then that was kind of truly shocking. But the other thing is that what youth workers will often say now is that the incidents that they used to see before the pandemic have now become more extreme, so more violent, but also more frequent. So if they saw, some kind of violent incident, maybe, I don't know, every 3 months, then now you're seeing a more extreme version of that, and possibly every 6 weeks or every 1 month. So clearly there was an escalation there, both in terms of vulnerability and need, but also in terms of the kind of activities and things that those kids were experiencing.
And what kind of things are children being forced to, being exposed to? What kind of violence or threats? Are there any kind of examples? I mean, why don't they just go back and say this has happened to their parent or parent? Is it
Yeah, I mean, some of it is, you'll read it in newspaper headlines, and, some of it is just unspeakable violence. And when I said before that there was this kind of systematic robbing of children, so they kind of lost the phones and the drugs they were meant to be delivering quite early on. And it's part of the business model that you rob those children. They then get completely blamed and threatened because they've lost what they were meant to be looking after. But usually then saying, okay, so it's not your fault, let's give you another chance, but now you owe us. Once they're in that position, then, they've lost their agency and they then feel intimidated. And then that usually grows over time. The things they might be asked to do might be to pay off some of their debts, might be anything from, more dangerous deliveries, but also violence towards other young people. And with that, there's a whole scale of horror that no one should ever have to experience, never mind young people. Attacks on other kids that maybe are in a rival gang, violence to individuals just to show you can, violence towards girls and young women, again, horrific violence that some will report, and sexual violence. And all of these things being very much about maintaining control and compliance as well. And looking at the amount of this kind of debt bond, obviously they will vary in amount, but we spoke to a mother when we were doing our research whose son, I think he was about 15, had become, drawn into the gangs, and often the parents will find something like a burner phone or some money, or the child will be, missing for a day or two. And she'd become aware that this was kind of going on, and actually the kids used to come to her house. So, they were so bold, if you like. Some of this was conducted almost in plain sight of the mother there. And she became aware of the debt bond and asked how much it was. And, thinking that these are children's lives that have been put in danger for this, it transpired that the debt bond was about £300. So all of this was being demanded for £300. And she asked to meet the 3 or 4 older boys, and said she wanted to pay him out of the debt bond, give them 300 quid. But as a result, the deal was she wanted them never to speak to her son again, never to come there, and to completely leave him alone. And she did that. And she did that. She paid the amount and they left him alone. She went on to form, very much a kind of support group for other parents in that situation, which was amazingly admirable. But, there's something there about that debt being honoured as it was paid off, which again is some kind of, strangely kind of archaic kind of business model, but also that, you would think that a debt bond would be thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. Obviously, there's an awful lot of families, especially those that are being targeted, who won't have £300. But, it's not £20,000 here. It was £300. And this parent could actually deal with that and get rid of them. But then go on, importantly, to help others too.
Really interesting. And what kind of signs do you think there are that parents or carers can look out for or should be looking out for to spot this kind of exploitation?
Yeah. I mean, it's important not to worry everyone to pieces at this stage, obviously, because, teenagers are full of all sorts of things that they're kind of developing, and life can be quite fluid at the time. But there are some big warning signs. Some is about mood change and about new groups of friends. If your child has suddenly got a new group of friends that seem as though they're absolutely, showering them with attention and gifts and money or access to places, then you've got to think, why is that going on? If they are a group of friends that seems to have plentiful money around, driving cars or going places, then again, where they're getting the money from. If you find the obvious, a burner phone or some money, then that's, there's obviously a conversation to be had then. But also if suddenly, all the patterns are being out change. So suddenly your child's out late, they don't explain where they've been, they don't want you to know. And also worryingly, obviously, if they've not come back and they don't come back to the next day, all of those things are huge kind of warning signs. And sadly, what some parents have said at that stage is, they found a burner phone or they found some money. And they've actually either rung up the police or social services, said, look, I want to work with you. I want your help to be able to, deal with this, to protect my child. What can we do? And sadly, those agencies just really aren't set up for that. In a way, it's one of those awful situations where actually nothing has yet happened. So, sorry, it's almost a case of, sorry, we don't do that here. You're
even the police.
Mm-hmm. So often, that's a very, very often story. But, I mean, again, doesn't have to be like that. And of course, there are some brilliant examples of very kind of positive, proactive work where you've got exclusion teams where that wouldn't happen. But, just that sense that if you ring up, your local police, then often you will not get the kind of positive response you would expect. So one of the things within the Commission on Young Lives that we proposed and recommended was that there should be a helpline for parents. That helpline should just be there to take them seriously, to give them some advice, to link them up with other services as well. Some parents will go talk to the school, and that can be a very good thing to do because the school will have seen the behaviour and noticed any changes over the last few weeks. And also maybe, work with the school to try to keep an eye on the children when they're in school, but also get them back into school. But always, of course, schools are busy places. There's a lot going on. They often don't have time for some of this. And of course, with colleges, the vast amount, a large percentage of older children will go to college of some kind, and they're much looser and larger. So there's less likely to be a kind of touch point there where you can work very closely with them easily. But those are the things, and I think what's really important is to know to be able to talk with your child if any of these things happen. Those that are trying to get them involved in other activities, at any point, they say that there's almost a recruitment gap of about 20%. So, if you're running an organization, you've got a recruitment gap of 20%, you're constantly trying to fill that kind of gap, which is essentially what they are doing. Always on the lookout for people to do that and kids to do that. But they will often try and isolate them from their parents, tell them that their parents don't really care for them, tell them that they're not looking after them, they're not looking out for them like they are. So again, it all adds to their ability to maintain control if they can keep that control and get that distance from parents. But of course, kids are desperately worried at that point. They're desperately trying to find a way out. And there's some fantastic work that enables them to do that, but not enough. And it needs to become, part and parcel of all of our, day-to-day work, if anyone who comes into contact with teenagers.
And what kind of emotional toll does it have on the child and the family, the foster?
Absolute extreme stretching of capacity to cope, I think. For families, they told me how, obviously desperately, desperately worried about the situation their child is in, desperately trying to work to get them into a safe position, desperately being able to find things to do and, keep them within the family realm. And sometimes horrific experiences where some parents have seen their child end up in A&E multiple times. If they've been stabbed on a number of occasions. One parent told me her child had been in A&E over 20 times. Each time he went missing, she would have to ring the police and go through the rigmarole of telling the story and the like. Again, some things that have changed probably need to change more. But again, that absolute alertness to anyone ringing to say, I think there's a problem, my child might be in danger, has to go into a new overdrive that says, tell me everything you know, how, and for that to be an ongoing area of concern for the police. So for parents, desperately, desperately worried. For young people too, just living life on the edge of this perilous state. And it's not just in areas of disadvantage either. Often young people, middle-class children, will have been recruited to deliver into middle-class areas where, there is a demand for recreational drugs, and they're choosing kids that won't go, that will be largely unnoticed in that area. And again, people have said, they've visited young people and their parents have been wealthy. They've gone missing from home. They've been threatened. Often there'll be, knife attacks and the like. And again, those young people have been drawn into this, this whole kind of, both stress but also threat that comes from this. The real, the way to prevent it is to have lots of adults around young people that are trusted, inspiring, and part of their life, because then you get that kind of ring of protection around young people. And that's what's largely been lacking.
But if a child is, and presumably the children that do fall into this become very secretive, if a child is refusing to kind of come out with information, what are the key things that a carer or parent should do to try and recognize what's happening and find out more? How do you get under the skin of it?
Yeah. So I think that communication is absolutely key, and being able to talk to them and spend time with them. The sad thing, of course, if you're, if you're a lone parent, if you've got several children of different ages and also working, there's a limit to how much of this you can do just because of sheer time. But be able to spend time with young people, being able to ensure that they've got places to go that's positive. If there's youth centres, if there's things going on around the school, then try to get them involved in that. Find others who can help. So again, with the school, Do they have they will have a safeguarding lead? Do they have family support? Do they have youth workers? Are there people within the school that can actually step out and help these young people? Some of the brilliant schools that are doing an awful lot in this will have youth workers as part of the school team. If the young person's struggling in school, or in fact, if they're suspended from school and worries about them being part of county lines, there'll be all sorts of kind of youth activities, one-to-one activities and the like for those young people where they can spend time together and build that trust. So I think there's so much to be gained by trying to reach out to others to get that help. Of course, do reach out to both the police and social services to see if social services especially can offer that kind of early help. I guess my warning would be sometimes they're not going to be able to do that just because they haven't got that kind of level of intervention set up, but they should have. So this is something to pursue. And really being able to then talk to the child about, the dangers of that, trying to get them away from that and being around them a lot. Of course, there will be a big push to try to maintain that independence or that time out of the grip. But really being able to just be around from them and have that urgency around it, because, these things can escalate quite quickly as well.
And back to exclusions, have you seen any patterns on who gets excluded the most? And do you think schools are too quick to exclude vulnerable pupils? And what can parents and carers do if they feel that that's not appropriate?
Yeah, so again, really being able to build a strong relationship with the school to be able to, in partnership, help, resolve any problems that your child might be having, but also help look at ways to help them thrive is really, really important. We know that children with special educational needs are much more likely to be excluded. We know Black children are much more likely to be excluded, especially Black boys. We know that children are often with poor mental health or with, neurodiversity needs are much more likely to be excluded. And not all schools will exclude children straight away. We know from the research we've done that actually 88% of the exclusions take place in 10% of the schools. Now, that's quite a thing. That means that most schools are doing their best to try to keep children in school. But if there is a case where children are struggling in school or at risk of exclusion, what we want schools to be able to do is to be able to intervene with some kind of support program to keep them in school. And again, the program where I talked about with youth workers, there's others around sport as well, that when they actually work with young people, and one of those schools said they'd had 65 young people referred to them over the year, when they'd worked closely with them, 63 of them stayed in school. They didn't need to be excluded from school. They were able to stay in school, safe and also thriving in school. And there's a brilliant scheme called Football Beyond Borders that use football as, an entry point for some of this work. They say their evidence is that, 95% of young people will stay in school and thrive. Now, knowing that that's possible, the ask has to be that this becomes a norm for schools. And we are putting a lot of emphasis on inclusion in schools. So schools that are asked to set out to provide that additional support with help, because of course they haven't had the funding to do that in the past, but with support to offer that support for children early before they get to crisis point. But also really work with parents as well to make sure that is the case. And there are some fantastic examples of schools that do that on a very regular basis. And we would like all schools to do that. There's a white paper coming from Education After Party Conference. So our hopes are high that that is going to be much more of the trend and direction that we see then.
And if a carer or parent is immediately worried about a child, would you say the first thing they should do is go to the school or go to the police, or what should they do apart from trying to talk to the child?
Well, I think if they're immediately worried and there's any suggestion or worry that they may be unsafe, I ring the police. Ring the police and ask for help, and potentially ring social services and ask for help, but start with the police. And if there's any suggestion that this isn't something that they can respond to, I think just carry on. What do they suggest? What advice do they have to keep their children safe? What do they think social services might do about it? So I think really, really push on that. Speak to social services if that's something that we feel comfortable with and it's appropriate, but then also talk to the school as part of that long-term plan to maintain that safeguarding for those children.
And are there sort of other local schemes that people could look at that are really making a difference that you know?
Fantastic youth centres and youth activities. There's a scheme and it's in partnership with a school actually, in the Hare Hills part of Leeds. And it's a group of schools called the Leeds Learning Alliance. They would say that they're inclusive schools. They haven't excluded anyone for a long time, but the way they do it is they work with community organisations such as one that's based in Hare Hills. It's called Catch. It's a fantastic place for young people. It's really part of the community. A lot of the people who work there and volunteer there are community members and parents themselves. But when children go there, and often the school will refer them, they book a number of places, if you like, over the year. They refer their children there. But they have, almost like with an alternative provision, they'll have education classes, but very much kind of designed around the needs of those young people. But even beyond that, they have a farm there. So they have animals, they have fish, they grow crops. And the young people are the ones who take responsibility for those. So there's like responsibility and trust in their, in their ability to do that. It's a really important validation for those kids. And you'll see young people who, it's their responsibility to feed the goats every morning. Well, they will really feel that they're being trusted in that way. Lots of activities, lots of kind of reflection and group sessions, lots of activities throughout the year, importantly, because, of course, those that are looking to identify kids aren't just going to do it on weekdays till 5:30. This is all year round. And it's just a place of such optimism and such kind of, such an important force for those kids that are going there. And, young people will go back into school, but very much spend a lot of their out of school time there. And Hare Hills has had its fair share of kind of, disorder over the last couple of years. There's a lot going on. They've had incidents there. But actually, the fact that you've got, such a positive community organisation and youth organisation in that area with lots of adults there that the kids look up to and trust, they don't want to lose that relationship with those adults. So they're going to respect what those adults ask them to do. And that shows. And I've seen that similar respect with youth teams. There's a youth team in Bradford that work very much alongside the attendance team to support and get, young people back into school. And if there's a relationship of trust already there, then it's much easier to be able to talk that young person into doing that because they won't want to break that relationship and that trust. And that's just so important.
And if a child is excluded or repeatedly suspended or excluded, is there advice that you'd give carers or parents what to do and how to navigate the system if they feel that this is harming them really?
It's really difficult for a lot of parents in that situation because everyone's in shock. The child will feel, very excluded themselves and rejected very often. Of course, as with all these things, the emphasis has to be in preventing this happening. So if there's any sign that things are going on, the school may ring up and raise things and raise concerns about what's going on. I think really being able to tackle those head on and make sure that you're working together, that it's been taken seriously, that you're talking to the child about it, and they're understanding what's at stake. If it does happen, then if it's a suspension, then I think really, to ensure that the child has work, ensure that the child has a structure in their life, ensure that they aren't left unsupervised, if at all, and, they're still in that learning process, and then hopefully will be able to return to school as quickly as they might. If it's an exclusion, then there will be an exclusion unit within the local authority. There's a legal requirement to respond to exclusions and to be able to ensure they get some kind of educational provision. I would say the emphasis there should be in approaching them swiftly, to really offering to work alongside them to find potential schools, and to also act yourself as a parent to approach schools, find the schools that have places on their waiting list, and find what the criteria would be to be able to for your child to be able to go there. So yes, there's a statutory exclusion unit, but there's so much to be gained, I think, about being proactive and large levels of self-help there. And that would mean, finding what their policy is towards taking children who might have been excluded. Do they have places? And then also, the more that can be done to really get the kind of, testaments from other people that have, that know the child, that maybe children's achievements, maybe they are great at sport, to really be able to provide those references that are all going to help in terms of making the case for children to be accepted in another school role. There are processes and protocols, which means that children will have routes to be able to go to other schools, but they take time often. And I think the more that can be done to be able to help that process as a parent, the better.
And what about children, school refusers? Many children, especially after lockdown, and we've talked about this, are reluctant to go, won't go. I don't know what the numbers are like, but how, does one force a child into school, or is it sometimes not something that's even possible?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, we know that 1 in 5 children, just under 1 in 5 children, are still persistently absent from school, slightly dropping, but still huge. And parents will obviously have their own approach. There'll be some who, will, forcing is a difficult word, because often there'll be tears, often there'll be, they'll physically refuse to do it. It's something that you have to build on over time, and having support again from the school and the attendance programs really, really important with that, to be able to find ways of building that routine, getting help, especially for those children who have some element of mental health condition or a need of specialist support, being able to work often with youth workers who can almost build that journey back into school. Sometimes that comes with early help from the school. So the school may offer early help to, help with that journey. At least in one city, I heard of parents who were privately buying in youth workers to work with their children to be able to put together, a plan, a journey. For some of those children, it might be about actually taking part in social activities first. I talked to a parent who had a child who was 15 and been incredibly sporty, popular boy before the pandemic, had reacted very badly to the isolation during the pandemic, and since just couldn't face coming out of his bedroom and spent a lot of time alone. and didn't want to go to the sports ground and the football ground round the corner, which he'd loved before. So part of that, journey planning, if you like, for the youth worker was to try to get, just for a few hours or, a day here and there or an hour here and there to start to go onto the football pitch, to start to see some of the people, his friends he would have known before, and to really start building that confidence that, you've got that sense of, they've got that sense of confidence and agency about being in the public domain, and then building from that. And those seem, when your child's thriving, it's really difficult to imagine the point when you could ever think that spending half an hour in a football ground once a month or something might be the kind of tiny steps you need. But sadly, those are some of the experiences that young people and families have had. Again, I just say, always ask for help and just relentlessly ask and demand in the most possible way, nicest possible way, help, because it's that's going to make the difference. Not help, that you're asking professionals to come in and take over your life, but help to work alongside you. The other thing is the ask for schools about whether they're doing, whether they're planning to do the kind of enrichment activities outside school, the play schemes, the after school clubs, which we know that many are now setting up, because those are the sort of things that help children. They will encourage children into school. Often parents will say the days they do want to go in is the days the after school club's on and there's things going on. Obviously, once they're there, it will help build that sense of belonging and being part of it. But, the school may be thinking about that or not, but it's a really positive suggestion that the school can respond to. What about putting on more after-school clubs, more play sessions and the like? Because this is something that a child like mine might make all the difference.
So looking back at your time as Children's Commissioner, are there any kind of cases or stories about county lines that have just stayed with you the most, that tell us, how bad it can be?
Well, there are some. There are inspiring, cases and memories as well. There's the case I told you about where the mother had bought her son out of his debt bond, and that was amazing to think of. That there was that dreadful situation for the boy, and actually the mother had faced it face on and head on, and had kind of come out of that. But of course, families that come out of that don't just come out of it unscathed and forgotten. It's there, the scars are there. There was a young boy who was 17 in Harrogate, quite a well-known case, that he was living in a hostel. He had left the family home 3 months before because there were high levels of violence, and the family just couldn't cope. But the authorities put him in a hostel, and eventually he took his own life. There was lots of drugs going on and the like. But the sad thing about that was that there were so many professionals that were meeting together about that boy, and they were meeting together, but he was by himself. And he just wanted people to be around him and help him, I imagine. And one thing that a very, very experienced youth worker, but someone who works with some of these young people to really get them out of these situations, said to me is that he often goes into a meeting of professionals, and he says to the professionals, I want you all to tell me, we're going to be in this room for an hour and a half talking about this young person today. I want you all to tell me how much time you've spent talking to them since we last met. And he can always guarantee, well, certainly it's not going to be an hour and a half. And many will have not been talking to them. So there's almost this system, which kind of, at first glance, you look at it and you think, oh, well, look, all these professionals are involved. But actually, they're not talking to the person in this that needs to have that first face-to-face support first. And that, a tragic, tragic consequence of that. The young people in the Northwest, the 14-year-olds, running the county line over 80 miles. They'd also, set the school on fire 3 times and were wearing balaclavas and machetes on the local estate, so that, a lot of families were finding new ways to walk around the estate because they didn't want to get their houses torched. Clearly that is a dangerous situation for everyone involved. But the end, you get to the end of this, and the point remains that this is real life. This is happening now. It's happening in plain sight. It's not being high enough a priority for anyone. It can be prevented. So in any way we can possibly prevent children falling into these terrible dangers, we must. And that means identifying them even before they start school if they need extra help, things like speech and language and the like. The majority of kids who are actually in custody, where clearly things are going very, very wrong, but quite often it might be that they've been involved in county lines, have communication problems. 85% of them have been excluded at some point. The majority of them won't have been in school on a regular basis since primary school. All of the clues are there for us to see, but we have to want to see them. And of course, we then, in my view, have a responsibility to act.
And you've mentioned a few times about what more can be done. Do you think the government is currently doing enough to tackle county lines and the rise in school exclusions and number of ghost children? Do you think?
Well, one of the big things is that when we set up the Commission on Young Lives, which was looking at these children who were falling from view and most at risk of becoming involved in violence and county lines, we set out over 18 months to look at things that worked around the country, to look at what the research told us, to talk to young people about what they felt about this, but also to put forward a solution, a national plan, if you like, of what could be. And at the heart of that was the proposal that we should have almost Sure Start for teenagers, youth clubs, youth centres in local areas, starting with those areas that have the highest knife crime and violence, but places that could be, real beacons of activity and inspiration and belonging, all of the things, open every evening, but also weekends as well, school holidays, just part of the fabric of the place. And then around that, not only great youth workers there that could inspire and guide those youngsters, but also access to mental health support, access to trauma therapy, access to family support as well. All the things that we know are really important about rebuilding young people's lives. And I'm really proud to say that they were taken, the government in opposition signed up to that. It went into the manifesto, and they're now being developed to roll out. There's going to be 50 of those in this Parliament, and the first 8 trailblazers are just under development. And they will need to be in areas where, there's the greatest risk. It means that we'll be working, with other youth workers, with other youth centres, with other services, with schools and the like in an area. But for us, that is the kind of model that we've seen that really can start to turn things around and tackle the horrors of county lines and everything that comes with it head on.
Fantastic. And just a final question. Is there one message that you'd like to share with carers or parents listening today about vigilance, about what to do? Is there a kind of clear message for them?
Well, I mean, I know that everyone will absolutely want 100% to do the best for their children. And, that is, absolutely as it should be. We all worry about what might come down the track and what's around the corner, and we don't want to spend our lives worrying. So I don't want to make everyone so fearful of, these incidences that, we hardly dare go out of the door, or, let our children go out, because it's important that children learn independence, are able to look after themselves in the public domain. However, we also do need to be very diligent about our young people's safety. If children are spending time unsupervised outside school, then we need to be very clear that we know as much about that as possible. We need to know if things are going wrong at school. And again, those positive relationships that we can build with school in advance are really, really important. And if there's any signs such, I talked about the horror signs, then don't think twice. Don't think, oh, I've just got the wrong end of the stick here. Absolutely act on it. And the police, depending on the level of concern, but the school, and if needs be, social services as well. And just persist for that, because all of these people are busy and they've all got a lot on their plate. But in a way, you're almost there as kind of a warrior for your own children. So you've got to fight for that. And of course, it shouldn't be a fight, but they will rely on you as well. So persist.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolutely fascinating, if not chilling, discussion. We do have an audience here. Someone has said that there are places in Scotland where exclusion is not supported, so that's useful. Thank you for adding that. If there are any more questions, please put them in the chat. There's a lot of compliments and a lot of thanks to you. I think it's really, really clear. So I don't think there are any more questions. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic to talk to you, and look forward to following this up. Okay,
fantastic. And take a look at the Centre for Young Lives website. There's more on there, and the hubs we talked about, the Sure Start for Teenagers. They're called Young Future Hubs. Look out for them, and we'll be talking about those. We've got a report coming out on those in about a week's time as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank
I think
you so much.
A link has gone down there for the Centre for Young Lives for anyone to press.
There you go.
Thank you. Fantastic. That's already there. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you then. Cheers. Bye-bye.